Hello and welcome to another weekly installment of GMBN Tech Ask, where you use hashtag AskGMBNTech down in the comments below of any of our videos, and we'll try and get back to you with an answer. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you're new to the channel, and maybe hit that big old notification button if you want to hear about us regularly. So let's dive straight in. I've got a question from MTB Jamala, who says, what would you choose, T-bar Allen keys or sliding T-bar Allen keys? Coming out with the big guns questions there straight. Yeah, so what he means, or she means, is we've got a T-bar, which is basically like a T-shape. Park Tools use a P-shape, that's why they call this a P-handle. And then we've got a T-bar with a sliding sort of little spinny thing here. So basically, the difference being that you should effectively be able to hold onto this sliding bit and turn and turn and turn as you see fit. So it's just sort of making it easier. But the thing I really like about the THH, well, 5s we've got here from Park Tool, is that it's got this sort of, you've got options. You've got the normal sort of chamfered edge, which makes it easier to get into bolts. And then you've got this sort of twisted edge here as well, which actually makes it really easy to get any kind of like locked in bolts or anything that's accidentally threaded, to get those out. So what would I choose? I would choose this one over this one just because I've got more options. I do like the slidey effect. It is really handy when you want to keep your tools in place. So a whole set of these is $79.99, and a whole set of these, this is the Pro Collection, is $119.99 here in the UK. So it's an extra 40 quid for the Pro set, but you do get those sort of added benefits. So if you have the budget, I personally would spend the extra £40, but yeah, if it's in your budget, why not? So BXCB Alonso says, what frame material lasts the longest? Right, that's a loaded question right there, because frame material, if it was just in a vacuum in a room or, you know, never ever used, it could last a lifetime. But obviously bikes just aren't like that. We ride them all the time. So what I will say is I think aluminium, it fatigues over time. Now, I'm not a hater of aluminium, but there are certain, you know, heat treatments on aluminium frames that means that not all aluminium frames come equal, and some of them will fatigue, you know, quicker than others. And if they're taking really hard hits all the time, they can sort of start to stress fracture and break. But generally they do say an aluminium frame can last from 5 to 10 years, whereas something like carbon, steel, tie, they're good for a lifetime. Admittedly, carbon can be just as fragile as aluminium, but at least with carbon it's repairable. So you might consider that to be a longer lasting frame because you can repair it. So it's a bit of a loaded question, that one. I would say most things last a lifetime apart from aluminium, which is debatable depending on the frame. Help LM or Help I'm Alive says, do you recommend opening the seal of new bearings and repacking them with waterproof grease? Does the benefit of more and better grease outweigh the risk of damaging the seals? Yeah, it's a bit of a tough one, that, because it is so hard to pull a seal out of a bearing and not damage it, basically. I personally think that a good seal on bearings is better than just having better grease in there. Especially if there's a lot of water ingress in your bike, maybe you ride in the wet a lot, it will go in, it will flush it out. Personally, I'd prefer a better seal. If you're concerned with it and you find that you're removing them and packing them with grease a lot, you might want to consider a sort of a more higher end bearing if you can. I don't know what bearings, where your bearings are going, whether it's linkages or wheels or something like that. Certainly bottom brackets, you can upgrade those quite a lot to make sure they're more sealed and they've got better quality materials, so you're less likely to have to maintain them on a regular basis. So I've kind of maybe not answered your question, but I think it's a bit of both, I would say. Diddy Doddy said, can you put 180mm forks on a frame that originally comes with 170mm? Would it affect the bike? In brackets, it's a 2020 Nukeproof Mega 290. Obviously I know the Nukeproof Mega, I own one myself. That is a 170mm bike. It is spec to be a 170. I would never recommend to anyone putting forks on that are longer than what the maximum is stated by that manufacturer or that particular model. The Nukeproof Mega is interesting that although it says it's 170, technically all you have to match is the axle to crown length. So on this set of forks here, axle, obviously your axle to crown up here has to be the same. So in theory, I don't know what forks you have, but in theory, if you have a 170 that maybe doesn't use all of the travel in the stanchion, and maybe, you know, you could potentially find a 180 fork that does have the same axle to crown but uses a different proportion of crown or stanchion or something like that, then in theory you could fit that to your Mega. But it's kind of unlikely that you'll find a 180 that is similar to the 170. My advice is, because it says in the Mega manual that you shouldn't exceed the axle to crown for fear of damaging your frame, I would consult Nukeproof directly. They're really, really helpful with customer relations and questions like this, and they might be able to help identify some alternatives for your forks. I would also say, if they don't want you to go for a 180, don't underestimate how good a good service on your forks can feel. They can feel so good, they can feel much better than just increasing your travel. And maybe check out some aftermarket inserts as well. Something like a True Tune is supposedly going to give you the feeling of more volume, even though you haven't increased the volume of your forks. So I don't know if it works, but that's what they claim. Maybe check it out. So Kev Dad says, why do the tyres on my bike recommend 29 to 58 PSI when it seems like everyone runs their tyres at 25 PSI or less? I have tubeless Vittoria Barzo 29 by 2.25 for reference. Yeah, it's a great tyre, and you're right, they do actually recommend, I think this one actually says it, well, this one says 20 to 40 PSI, but yeah, the Barzos do recommend 29 to 58 PSI, and I think they're being very conservative. What I will say about the Barzo, what's unusual about them is that they have 120 TPI, and that's thread per inch. So we have rubber and we have threads on the side of a tyre wall, and more threads means less rubber, which is more expensive, but it's more supple than rubber is. Rubber is actually not very supple at all, depending on the compound. So they will feel a lot more supple than perhaps your conventional tyre, which can often be around about, I don't know, 70 TPI or whatever, half the thread count that you've got. So I would say maybe run them higher than what you're used to, start at that minimum just to be on the safe side and see what it feels like. And then I would try and creep down to the pressure that you usually have. So if you've had a 29 2.25 before, what pressure were you running? Start to run down to it and see how it goes. I've run them low before and it's not been a problem, but just, you know, be easy on your rims and go slowly. Mike McDermott said, I get that reach and wheelbase measurements can impact stability, but how does reach impact comfort? Is a longer reach more comfortable for long rides? I mean, it depends. So reach is the middle of your bottom bracket to the middle of your headset. And so this will affect your position when you're stood up. So when you're descending or riding single track out of the saddle, then if the reach is too long, you might feel stretched out. However, if you're sat down, it won't affect it. If you imagine if your saddle is super slack, then you're going to be really stretched out, whether your reach is short or long or not. Sat down, your top tube length is probably more important when it comes to comfort and stretching. You go on in your question to talk about back soreness after long hours, so I'm assuming you probably sat down a lot, and I would pay attention more to your top tube length, which is what will affect your stretch when you're sat down more often. But if you're moving from an XC bike to a trail bike, which you've also mentioned, you might find that on a trail bike, the stack, so the height at the front end of the bike, will be a lot higher. And personally, I've heard a lot of friends who complain about racy XC bikes being uncomfortable on their back because they're just slammed so low at the front. And I think you'll find that raising that front end, heightening that stack, will actually be a lot better, a lot more comfortable for your back soreness over a long period. So I guess the answer is reach does matter when you stood up, but there's a lot of other factors in geometry and trail bikes that will come into play. So Francis D says, hi Anna and Doddy. Mountain bike tyres are getting harder and harder to mount on the rims. Last time was the first time. I'm riding Michelin Wild Enduro Race and Bontrager Elite carbon wheels, and I couldn't get them on the rims. I actually hurt both my thumbs. Yeah. I've been there. Yeah, there are some combinations that just really don't work. And in fact, there are recommendations now. Most tyres, actually most wheel manufacturers will recommend what tyres are compatible with their wheels, and vice versa. Some might say that, you know, their tyres are only compatible with hooked rims or hookless, for example. So there are compatibility issues. I did have a look for the Bontrager Elite Carbons. I couldn't find a compatibility chart, although your 2.4s should be absolutely fine on that tyre. But I have noticed that they are a really secure fit. They are trying to make such a tight fit so not to burp or have any incidents of rolling a tyre when you're riding. But with that means that fitting them might be a nightmare, basically. I would say next time you have to do this, try to lubricate the tyre and the rim with washing up liquid and a bit of water. That will make it slip on better, and try to work the bead around the centre of the rim, so there'll be a little indent. And that is like the smallest circumference. So the more your tyre can get into that smaller circumference, the less you're having to work the rest of the tyre into place. And maybe think about getting some tyre aids, like the Cushcore lever is really sturdy, it has a big handle, and they also do a third hand which secures on and stops the tyre trying to unravel as you chase it into the rim. So maybe that would help as well. And that's my final question. So thanks for joining me today. And if you have any questions yourself, don't forget to use #AskGMBNTech. Thanks, bye.